Okay, let's start. So today we will do the final review. So in this review, I will present 10 questions, mainly focusing on the 5-stage pipeline and cache and the DRAM. So the first question is about the pipeline, particularly the instruction fetch. So in the pipeline, we have 5 stages. So in the final examination, you can expect some questions asking the details in each stage. Here is one example. So please explain working flow of the instruction fetch stage. So what's the function of the mask? So in the first stage, which is the instruction fetch, of course, we read or fetch the instruction that will be processed in this cycle. In the next cycle, we need to read this instruction so that we can get the instruction. And in order to read the instruction text, we need the text. The instruction text is called, which is the PC. So after the read operation, we need a date on the so that the PC can point to the next instruction. And this the function of, so I explain the function of that add 8 so that the PC can point to the next instruction. Assume that you run the application. And this part is whether you actually choose the next instruction or take the branch. So another input of max is actually the branch. So this max is used branch and so I use I here to indicate this 8. So on 64-bit machine, this is 8 because 2 to 8 is a 64. If you have a 32-bit machine, then it's a 4. So if you have any question, you can interrupt me and ask. So the function of the adder is compute the address for the next instruction. And the function of the mask is to select between the next instruction and the branch prediction result. So the second question is explain the working flow for the of the decoding stage. Decoding stage is the second stage. So what's the function of this destination register and the data? The decoding stage, after you get the instruction, you decode and you wait the function of assume that you consume something like this. So you need to read the data for A and the function of the destination data of C and the register name. I register name of C. So they can be used to write back after you actually write the value of C back to the register file. So the destination register is the name of C, and the data is the value. So the data is the result of the value of and the destination variable. So the third question is about the execution stage. So what's the function of this mask? This mask is actually used to select between the register. So besides this type of instruction, it's possible for you to compute A plus 1. So this one is actually an immediate value, immediate data. So you don't know each type of instruction you actually run. And the immediate data. The question 4 is about the write back stage. So in write back stage, there are two masks. The first one is the input will be and the ALU stop. So besides this type of infraction, it's possible for you to run something like this. So this instruction indicates you want to read a piece of data. That piece of data, the address is actually stored in the register A. So after you complete this instruction and complete this instruction, you need to select whether you need to write B or C back to the register file. So this instruction will have a value no need because this instruction indicates a read operation. And this instruction will have an ALU result. Between these two types of instructions. And the second mask here, two destination registers. By the second mask instruction, or the write some memory instruction. Only for the load instruction. But you don't need a write back for the write instruction. And this mask can help you to enable this write. Enable for the register file. So the first mask is used to select the instruction between the ALU instruction and memory instruction. The second mask is to help you to generate the write enable signal to distinguish whether this is a load instruction or the write instruction. So that's all for the five-stage pipeline. We just ask several components, the function of several components in the five-stage pipeline. Nothing you need to compute. So the question 5 is about the cache. So I will provide the access latency for each level of cache. Assume that you actually get a hit in that level of cache, and then the miss rate or hit rate. So in this particular example question, I provide a hit rate. These are the hit rates. And then the effect latency. Because in this question, we have 3 levels of cache. If you have a miss in the L1, you will go to L2. If you have a miss in the L2, you will go to L3. If you have a miss in the L3, you will go to the memory. Because we have 3 levels of cache in this example. So eventually the memory will serve all the misses in the cache. And the question asks you to compute the average memory access latency. So you can compute that in this way. So 80% memory access actually will be hit in the L1. So 80% will pay 2 cycles. And the other 20%, in the other 20%, so 80% will hit in L1 and will pay 2 cycles. The other 20%, in the other 20%, 60% will hit in the L2 and then pay 20 cycles. In this 20%, 40% will actually go to L3 cache. And then 40% will actually keep in L3. They will pay 60 cycles. So for the other 60%, they will go to memory. Memory has memory will pay 200 cycles. So totally there are 4 components. You can see that eventually we start these 4 components to have the average memory access latency. So I write 4 lines here to indicate the 4 components. For all the memory access, 80% will keep in L1. And then you can use 1 minus p, which is the 20, the other 20%. In the other 20%, 60 will keep in the L2. And in the other 20%, 1 minus 50 will go to the L3 cache. Actually, in these memory accesses, 40% will actually keep L3, so they will pay 60. And all the other memory access will pay, then they will pay 200. Right. So again, we have 4 parts: L1, keep in L1, keep in L2, keep in L3, and in the memory. Questions? So this question is actually the question in number 4. And I believe this question is similar to the previous one. This question is actually combined several points, including the right to replace, the cache replacement policy, memory average access latency calculation. So we can do this question one step by step. So let's read the question first. So what percentage of all memory references? Memory references means memory access cause a main memory access. The main memory accessed before the memory request is satisfied. So the first part is to ask what's the percentage of memory request that actually will go to the main memory. In the first line, it provides several. This is the law. And the first level of cache, they have 2 levels of cache. First level is a direct mapping, write back, write allocation cache. 8 kilobytes total size. Each block is 8 bytes. And it has a perfect write buffer. This is the first data cache. This first level instruction cache is also a direct map cache, but only 4 kilobytes and 8 byte blocks. The second level cache, unified cache, you only have so in the L1 cache, you have a data cache and an instruction cache. in the L2 cache, you only have one cache for both instruction and data. So the L2 cache is a two-way set associative cache, write back, write allocation. 2 megabytes total size, and each block is a 32 byte. L1 instruction cache. L1 data cache. This L2 cache. The L2 cache is 2 megabytes. And each block is 32 bytes. Two-way set. And the L1 data cache is a direct map. Eight K bytes. Each block is 8 bytes. The L1 instruction cache is also a direct map. Four kilobytes. 8 bytes. So after you read the first two paragraphs, you can have this picture. So the first level instruction cache has a miss rate of 2%. 2% miss rate. First level data cache is 15% miss. And the second level cache has a 10% miss rate. So assume that 40% of all instructions are data memory access, and 60% are reads and 40% are writes. So for all the instructions, 40% instruction are actually data memory access. And then 60 is load, is reads, and 40% are writes. Assume that 50 of the blocks in the second level cache are dirty at any time. Assume there is no optimization for the faster read on L1 and L2 misses. So 40% are dirty data. So we have done the first two paragraphs. The first question is what percentage of all the data memory references will actually access the main memory? So how to compute that? So the question is about the data memory access. So we only care about this part, L1 data and L2, and then the main memory. So the L1 data has a miss rate of 15%. And the L2, so this 15% miss will go to L2. Okay, in this 15%, among this 15%, 10% miss rate, 10% will actually generate a miss and will go to the main memory. Any question on this? So I believe this part is similar to the previous question, how to compute the average access latency. But this question is very complex because it combines a lot of details together. It gives you some irrelevant data to confuse you. But in order to do the first sub question, this sub question, you actually only need the numbers on the L1 data and L2. So the L1 data miss rate is 15%. So only this 15% data memory references will go to L2. And among this 15%, 10% will miss, will generate a miss and will go to the main memory. So this is how to compute that value. So how many bits are used to index each of the caches? Assume the cache are presented physical addresses. So we have three types of caches here. Let's analyze this one by one. Do some analysis on them one by one. The L1 cache, both L1 caches are direct map cache, no matter the L1 instruction cache or L1 data cache, they are direct map cache. The question is how many bits will be used to index the cache? So this is the direct map cache. I just copied this slide from our slide of our class, which explains the direct map cache. So this is the memory address in the address of a memory access. The lower bits, the least significant bits indicate the block offset. The block offset means, for example, if the block size here is 8 bytes, 8 bytes is actually 64 pieces. 64 bits is 2 to 8. So you will have 8 from 0 to 7. Okay. This slide indicates another configuration, but I will use this slide to explain the conversion I wrote in here. So if your block size is 8 bytes, you have 64 bits, and you need 8 bits here because 2 to 8 is 64 bits. Then this block size will from 0 to 7. And then the index, how many bits you need index is. Index means how many entries, how many blocks you have in your cache. How to compute that? You can use the total cache capacity to total cache capacity divided by the block size. So for the, let's start from an instruction set and instruction cache. For the L1 instruction, the total capacity is 4 kilobytes, and each block is 8 bytes. So the result here is quantum K. Quantum K is 512. So in order to index 512 blocks, you need 9 bits. So for that instruction cache configuration, you need 8 bits here and 9 bits here. For the data cache, the size is 8 kilobytes. You need 1K. You have 1K blocks. 1K indicate 2 to 10, which is you need 10 bits. So for the data, L1 data cache, 8 bits here. And all the other bits are used as cache. So this is the case for the direct mapped cache. For the two-way set associated, because you have a two-way, you actually divide the entire L1 cache into 2 parts. Each part is also a direct mapped cache. So two-way indicator, you have a 2 direct mapped cache. Then you can use the same way to analyze this. Because each block in the L2 cache is 32 bits. Equals to 256 bits. And this is this is 2-way. So for the block offset, you need 8 bits. And you can compute the index by using the total capacity divided by the block size. And then you have a 64K block. And this 64 blocks will be separated into 2 ways. each way has 32K. So in order to index this 32K, you need 15 bits. So for the two-way set associated to cache, you actually first compute total block number, use the total capacity divided by the block size, and then you have the total block numbers for two sets. And then you divide it by 2. Get the block number in one set, and then you can do the same thing as the direct connect cache. The part C asks how many cycles can the longest possible data memory access take, and describe the flow during this access. Describe what will happen in this longest data memory access. So the longest data memory access will be something like this. You have L1 in the data cache, and then you have also a miss in the L1, miss in the L2. Yes. I will explain that. Miss in the L1, miss in the L2. And then you also need to do the write back. So the part C is about the cycle numbers, average access latency. For by reading the first two paragraphs, we have no cycle numbers, so we need to continue to read the third paragraph. So the second level heat latency is a 10 cycle. The main memory is 100. Cycle. 100 cycle for the first bus width of data. After that, the memory can derive consecutive bus width data on each following cycles. So the non-consecutive memory request cannot overlap. Access to one memory location must complete before access to another memory location can begin. So the memory bus is 128 bits. So this bus is actually 128. This bus is 64 bits. The L2 cache to the memory bus is 128. So each block is a 32 byte in L2. 32 byte is 256. And this bus is a 128 bit. So you need 2 cycles. So you need 2 cycles to access the memory. And the first cycle actually takes 100. I'm sorry, you need to divide this 32 byte request into 2 parts, so that each part can go through this 128 bit bus. The first part will take 100 cycles, and the second part will only take 1 cycle. So this is the why. This is why you have 100 plus 1. So each block in the L2 is 32 byte. And the bus here, you need to read or write this much data in memory path. In order to do that, you need to transfer this much data on this bus. So you need to divide this request into 2 parts, because the bus lead is actually smaller than the block size. So as this, the third paragraph indicates, the first part will take 100. And then that access time is 100. The first bus lead. So for the first bus leads the data, it takes 100 seconds. And then the next cycle it will be the second part. Any question on this? Again, back to the longest memory access. You will access L1 by 1 cycle. And then the access latency for L2 is 10 cycle. And then the access to the main memory is 100 plus 1 cycle. Why do you need add another 100? Because you needed to invoke the replacement policy. You needed to do the write back. Your data is dirty. You modify that piece of data. You will evict in the L2. So you needed to write back the data. So when you have a miss in the L2, you will go to the memory. And when you go to the memory, because the L2 is a write allocation, you need to write the data back to the L2. After you get the data from the main memory, you need to write the data back in the L2. In order to write the data into the L2, you need to evict one piece of data first. So that's the reason why you first write a piece of data to the memory and then read it. the data you want to read. So you actually access the main memory twice. So you have a miss in the L1, and then you have a miss in the L2. The first miss can be indicated by the first one. The second miss can be by the 10. After you find out you have a miss in the L2, you want to access the main memory. You want to read a piece of data from the main memory, and then store that piece of data in the L2. So that for another request on this piece of data, you can directly read that piece of data from the L2. So how can you store that data in the L2? Your L2 has already been full. So the first step is, of course, to evict something. Because this question asks about the longest possibility. We have to assume that piece of data is dirty. You need to write it back to the memory first, and then read the actual data you want to read. So you have a one write and one read to the memory. So that's the reason why. And then the D part asks the average memory access latency in cycles. So we have the instruction part and the data part. Okay, you can see that. You can see that assume 40% of the all instructions are data memory. So we have all the instructions here, and the 40% are actually data memory. In this 40%, 60 are reads, are loads, and 40 are writes. And this question asks you to compute the average memory access latency, including the instruction part and the data part. So actually, all the Pep1 and the cache are connected. Remember, we explained that the instruction fetch stage. Each instruction, you need to generate an instruction read for each instruction. So if I treat all the instruction as 100%, so you need to read 100%. And of course, these 100% read are for instructions. And in this 100%, 40% are actually generate extra data rate. So totally, the memory access is 100% plus 40%. This is the reason why we have a 1.4. 1.4 total percentage of the memory access. So 100% for instructions, because we need to read the instruction for each instruction. Otherwise, we cannot fetch the instruction. Instruction fetch means reading the instruction. So this is 100%. In is 100%. 40% are data access. So 40% of them will generate extra data access. So 100 plus 40, which is a 1.4. This one indicates the instruction. 0.4 indicates data. So this is the ratio. So this is the ratio for the the weight of the average instruction access rate in the total average. And this is the ratio of the data average access rate for this part. Any question on the first? Yes.
You're saying 1.4 because you're saying how 100% memory access.
5% after the instruction. You need to, for each instruction, you need to work, right? Because you need to do the 5-stage pipeline. In the first stage, you always need to fetch an instruction. This is true for all the instructions. So it's 100%. So some instruction is computation, like I write A plus B equals to C. You don't need to, generate any extra data access for these type of instructions. But some of them are load and store. Load and store are actually 40%. So this is why I use 100 plus 40. So that's why you have the first one. The second task is to compute this one and this. So let's try the data cache first. For the data cache, the miss rate is 15%. So you need to pay one factor for the L1 cache anyway. And 15% now go to the L2. The miss rate of L2 is 10%. So you will pay this much. And among this, 15%, 10% will actually go to the net memory. And the main memory data is one.
Why do we latency is it 1 plus instead of like if we've got miss rate of 2%, why 0.9?
0.8 plus 1.
0.9, right? Because it's usually like a hit rate time. Yeah, hit rate times cycle plus miss rate. Right, like when we did question 3, I think we had, the level 3 today. do we have the hit ratio times the number of cycles plus the miss ratio times. But now we just have one instead of the hit ratio.
This is because so you will look up you will look up the first level level 1 cache anyway. So all the requests will go to the L1 cache. So you will pay 1 cycle for all the.
This is part of the pipeline.
That's right.
There's always.
That's right. But you can also use the method in our in that previous question. I will try to modify this if I present this question in the final exam. So this 1.5 right now. So we don't have cover the virtual address, so we don't have this question 7. And then we have the question 8. The question 8 is about the DRAM. So the question 8 is about open page and closed page policy. So assume you have a one application and the application has very strong spatial locality. Which policy should it take? I will explain this by following slides. So during read, the data will be at the end of no matter you read it 0 or 1, the content itself will become quantified. So the data will be described. This is so-called destructive read. So originally you have 1 and 0. And then you perform the read. After the read, the content itself will be broken. You have those data only in the file artifact. So at this time, you can send your data to the robot. Now the data can temporarily stored in the robot. But the data in the cell has been described. At this kind of step, you have 2 options. The first option is to write back. You write the data back to the cell so that the cell can have the original data. Or you can just, keep this status and expect the following request. So if you actively do the write back, write the data back to the cell, this is so-called a closed row. If you just keep this status, it's so-called an open row. The benefit of the open row is that if you have again, you don't have to do anything. You just send out the data immediately. So the open page policy can help you to benefit those applications who have very which have very large spatial locality. But if your application has no spatial locality, it will request another row. Then if you open your row like this, you have to do the restore first and open another row. This restore latency and row opening latency will all on the critical path. For those types of application, which has no spatial locality, you should adopt the closed row policy. You should actively close it. After you close this row, you only need to pay the row opening policy. Again, this is the autonomic identity form. For the application which has a very large spatial locality, you should adopt the open row policy. Otherwise, if your application has no spatial locality, you should adopt the closed row policy. So the question 9 is also about average. We consider the memory level parallelism. How to consider the memory level parallelism? You just divide the memory level parallelism. You, for example, this term indicates the latency on the memory part, and you just divide it. So you don't need to worry about this complex question. We will have more questions like this in the examination. So I will try to break the question into some simple ones, so that there's no confusion. And then the question 10 is about cache, fully associated cache, and self-associated cache. You can see that from the slides. Any question? So for sure, you will have the details, what's the function of the adder, what's the function of the mask in that 5-stage pipeline part. That's for sure, because I present the full question about that in this review. The second thing for sure is that you must have some average memory access latency computation, like the question 9 and question 4. But I'm sure that you will have no complex question like that large question. No question like this. If I present something like this, I will break it into some simple ones. So you can expect some question like a question 5. And question 9. So this is the majority for the final examination. And there's no knowledge points before the midterm. So what's done in the midterm is that we only have the 5-stage pipeline and hash and memory. Any other question? Yes.
Sorry. Back on the question, I
1.5.
yeah. That's like especially there with 10 plus 0.1 0.5 or times or 1.5. I was 1.5.
So you have a 40% dirty data here. For this 40%, you need to write back. I'm sorry, it's a 50%. So 50% block, you can see that. Assume 50%. So for the dirty data, you need to write back. So 1.5 can be calculated as so for 100%. You need to read, right? Read from the DRAM. And for 50%, which are dirty data, you need to generate a write. I actually borrowed this question from Sure. Each created by someone else. So they try to put everything together to confuse you. But in our final examination, I will break them down. So you don't have to expect some question like this. But we do have question 9, something like question 9. Like this one, the simpler one. So on next Monday, we will have the Q&A. If you just read, the slide. If you have any questions, you can ask me on next Monday. And then we will have the exam on next Wednesday. If you have no question, we can stop today. Thank you very much.